There are two Mongolias in the world today. One is a landlocked sovereign nation nestled between Russia and China, wide open, windswept, and free. The other is an autonomous region sitting quietly inside China's borders, its name carrying the echo of a history that could have gone very differently. To most outsiders, this seems strange. Why would a place called Inner Mongolia not be part of Mongolia at all? The answer stretches back centuries, wins through conquest and dynasty, through civil war and cold calculation, and ultimately through a series of moments where the fate of a people was decided not by the Mongolians themselves, but by the powers pressing in around them. To understand how Mongolia split in two, you have to go back to the height of its power. In the 13th century, the Mongols didn't just conquer China, they became China. Kublai Khan, grandson of the legendary Genghis, finished what his forebears had started. He toppled the Song dynasty, the last holdout of a fractured Chinese empire, and in its place erected the Yuan Dynasty, with himself as emperor. For the first time in history, all of China answered to a Mongolian ruler. But power has a strange way of softening those who hold it. Ruling China meant living like China. The Yuan court absorbed Chinese customs, Chinese culture, Chinese ways of thinking. The conquerors, over generations, began to resemble the conquered. It couldn't last. No dynasty ever does. By the mid-14th century, the Yuan Empire was buckling under rebellion, famine, and internal strife. In 1368, the Ming dynasty rose and drove the Mongolian rulers out of China proper. What remained of the Yuan Empire retreated northward, a shadow court ruling from Karakoram, still clinging to its imperial title but holding little real power. And here, quietly, the seeds of division were planted. The Mongolian nobles who had settled closer to the Ming border had grown comfortable. They had adopted Chinese lifestyles, built roots, accumulated wealth. When later Yuan emperors tried to reassert central authority over them, these southern nobles resisted. They had no interest in being pulled back into the orbit of a weakening empire. They wanted stability, and they were willing to look elsewhere for it. In the early 17th century, everything changed. A Yuan emperor named Ligdan Khan made one final push to centralize Mongolian power under himself. It was an ambitious move, and it failed spectacularly. The nobles of the southern Mongolian lands refused to submit. Instead, they looked east, toward a rising power that the Chinese had not yet learned to fear, the Manchu. The alliance that followed would reshape the map of Asia. The Inner Mongolian nobles joined forces with the Manchu, and together they dismantled the last remnants of Yuan authority. Then, riding that momentum, they turned south and conquered China itself. In 1644, the Qing dynasty was proclaimed. The Manchu, with their Mongolian allies, now sat on the dragon throne. It is one of history's great ironies. The people of Inner Mongolia helped build the very dynasty that would lock them inside China's borders forever. The Qing court was pragmatic in how it managed its vast territories. Outer Mongolia, the remote, thinly populated steppe to the north, was conquered later, in the late 17th century, and governed with a light hand. The Qing emperors recognized that controlling those endless grasslands through force alone was impractical, so they granted the Outer Mongolians significant autonomy. They restricted Chinese settlers from moving in. They let the Mongols govern themselves in exchange for loyalty. Inner Mongolia was treated differently. Closer to the Chinese heartland, woven into the administrative fabric of empire, its people gradually lived alongside and intermingled with Han Chinese settlers. Over time, the ethnic and cultural lines began to blur. In 1912, the Qing dynasty collapsed. After more than 2.5 centuries of imperial rule, China became a republic, at least on paper. In reality, it was a nation in chaos. Warlords carved out territories. The central government in Beijing struggled to assert authority over provinces that no longer felt bound to obey. In Mongolia, the mood was electric. This was the moment they had been waiting for. With the empire gone, the Outer Mongolians declared independence. Their spiritual and political leader, the Bogd Khan, was proclaimed the new Mongolian ruler, and he dreamed big. He wanted not just Outer Mongolia, but all the Mongolian lands, Inner Mongolia included. The dream was not unreasonable. The desire was genuine. But dreams need more than desire to survive. Beijing refused to recognize Mongolian independence. Chinese officials argued, not without some logic, that a sovereign Mongolia would quickly fall under Russian influence, becoming a buffer state controlled by a rival power. And so they dispatched troops. Inner Mongolia was relatively easy to hold. It had cities, it had infrastructure. It had a large Han Chinese population who had no interest in joining a new Mongolian state. Pushing into the outer steppe was another matter entirely, but for a while, the Chinese managed that too. In 1919, with Mongolia's popular Prime Minister Togtok Taij dead and the country politically fractured, a Chinese warlord named Shu Shuzheng saw his opportunity. He marched his forces into Outer Mongolia and deposed the Bogd Khan. Just like that, Mongolian independence was extinguished, or so it seemed. From the north, in 1921, came one of history's more bizarre figures, Roman von Ungern-Sternberg, a Baltic German baron fighting on the losing side of the Russian Civil War. He was, by most accounts, a violent, mystical fanatic who genuinely believed it was his destiny to restore the Mongol Empire. His methods were brutal, his worldview was unhinged, and yet he drove the Chinese out of Outer Mongolia. He restored the Bogd Khan to his throne. It was not to last. The Soviets, deeply alarmed by a fanatical anti-communist warlord sitting on their southern border, moved swiftly. Bolshevik forces, fighting alongside Mongolian communist allies, defeated Ungern-Sternberg's army. He was captured, tried, and shot. In his place, a communist government was installed. Mongolia became, in all but official name, a Soviet satellite state. Decades later, when Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party took power in 1949, one of Stalin's conditions for Soviet support was Chinese recognition of Mongolian independence. Mao agreed, and so the border was drawn and held. By that point, Inner Mongolia was majority Han Chinese. Its demographic reality made any incorporation into the Mongolian state politically impossible. The two regions, once indistinguishable, had grown apart over centuries of separate administration, migration, and identity. Today, Mongolia, the independent nation, is one of the least densely populated countries on Earth. Its capital, Ulaanbaatar, holds nearly half the country's population. The rest of the land is steppe, desert, and sky. It carries its sovereignty carefully, always aware of the two giants pressing in on either side. Inner Mongolia, meanwhile, remains part of China. Its population is overwhelmingly Han Chinese. The Mongolian language and culture survive, protected to varying degrees, but the region's character has been shaped more by its decades inside China than by the memory of the empire it once helped build. Two Mongolias, same name, entirely different fates. The story of how they came apart is not one of dramatic betrayal or a single catastrophic war. It is something quieter and more unsettling, a slow drift, shaped by alliances of convenience, the collapse of empires, the ambitions of warlords, and the cold math of great power politics. The Mongolian people, in the end, did not lose their unity in a single moment. They lost it across centuries, decision by decision, border by border, until one day, the map simply reflected what history had already decided.